our other slogan last year was for sure, we need more cows, because we were not getting herd effect and not moving across the 40 acres that we had fast enough. And that creates problems in terms of like your recovery time and building a healthier soil system. And keeping those plants in an active growth phase. So the custom grazing is a really great way to, one, have a little bit of supplemental income. It's not a huge amount. We're kind of just charging conventional prices. In retrospect, I would encourage people, if they're doing regenerative daily moves, charge a premium. Like there's some serious care we're taking to these animals. We know immediately when they have red eye or, foot rot or whatever else. So that's been really good for us because we have moved significantly faster through our pastures in a good way because of both increased herd, but also this custom grazing.
Hello and welcome. We are so excited to have you guys here today. I want to just jump in. Tell us the tale. How did it get started? How did you guys meet? And why did you decide to jump into farming?
It's good to be here.
It is good to be here. Thank you for having us. So first, I met Mitch through the other co-founder who's not here. His name's James, through work. And Mitch actually has more of an interesting tale about it because he and our other business partner kind of were at odds with each other, and they grew up with each other. So I'll let Mitch tell that story. Actually,
you want me to start there?
Yeah.
So essentially, I have 10 years in tech. I was a product development person. I always had an underlying sort of draw towards social issues, but I also was trying to provide income for my family, and so I was part of a tech company that had a good social issue focus at the time. But one of my ways of being socially engaged was by being a vegetarian and not eating meat because meat was killing the planet. That was the narrative. That was my truth at the time. So my neighbor and best friend, James Gilson, growing up, we happened to both be outside our parents' house, and he yelled at me that he had some fresh elk he had hunted, and if I wanted elk. I said, no, I'm a vegetarian. He said, why? I said, because I'm saving the planet, bro. And he said, well, no, man, it's not the cow, it's the how. And I was like, that's a cool saying, but and he's like, I'm like, no, I'm right. Let me send you this video. I've got a video, man. And he's like, no, I've got a video. So we send each other videos. Needless to say, his video won out. Just for people who want to know what those videos were, I can't even remember exactly. My video, I think, was a Vox Media video talking about the different emissions of different animals, like a whole spectrum of like 20 different livestock animals, or any kind of protein meat, actually. And so the video he sent me was the Alan Savory TED Talk on desertification. Totally just got my mind.
I think that's everybody's story, right? I saw Alan Savory TED Talk and my world became different after that.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, this guy killed a lot of elephants and he's still making up for it. And he is dead set on his whole life being committed to this. So that's how James got me thinking different about regenerative agriculture. I hadn't heard of that word before. And he had just gotten on this kick of Alan Savory and the Savory Institute. And he was sending me links every day. And like, friends are great, but sometimes they're just overbearing. So then I'll hand it off to McKinley can tell the other half.
Yeah. So I met James. I've been my family's been in real estate for a long time. So we were selling a piece of property, and James had come to look at it. And he was talking about homesteading. And I grew up, my dad was back in the day, it was called holistic resource management. He started doing seminars in the early 90s about this kind of grazing, and eventually turned into Holistic Management International and Savory Institute. And he was a certified educator that way. And I watched that TED Talk when I was like 23. I was like, oh, I didn't realize how impactful what my dad was doing growing up was. Like, that's just what people do. And so that changed my life. And I'm an accredited professional at the Savory Institute, and we're involved with the Soil Food Web School with Dr. Elaine Ingham as well. And met James just showing a piece of property, and we hit it off huge with that. And then James introduced me to Mitch, and Mitch was, I think, a little bit disenchanted with the tech world. And we just dove headfirst into getting into agriculture. So we made an order for 150 chicks, and we were in the worst drought Utah's ever had that year. So we were really nervous to buy a lot of cattle just because we didn't know if we'd be able to feed them. And the cost of hay had gone up like, I think 300% or something. So we decided to do it. But anyway, we bought three pair of cattle, and ran it. We got a lease on 50 acres and just started from there and learned what worked and what didn't very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
By the way,
walk
when
us
James,
through. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, when James called me after that, going to look at that house, he was like, it was like it was divine intervention. I think he had just seemed like an angel because he was so like he couldn't speak. He's like, dude, this thing just happened. And so, we're like, whatever, divine intervention, like the maker's hand, it really felt, in retrospect, especially, we kind of look at each other and we're like, can you believe we didn't even know each other 2 years
Super
ago?
weird.
And now, like, I spend more waking hours with this dude than I do my wife. Like,
Same.
And everybody's happy about that, right?
It is. Yeah. No, I mean, we're very lucky to be doing this, especially in the location we're at, because to get a lease or do anything here is really challenging because we're kind of a high value area. So we're really, really fortunate. But so I guess we'll kind of start from the beginning. So first we got the chicks. We didn't have a brooder. We didn't know what we were doing. So that round we put it in our other business partner, James's shed. And that year, June was the highest temperatures on record. Usually in this area, we never get above 89 degrees. We got to like 93 for a month straight. And so we were really worried about temperatures. James actually handled that basically by himself. I think Mitch helped him a little bit too. And then we put them on pasture, and we used the Joel Salatin tractors. And that was an interesting experience. I'll kind of let Mitch talk about that.
Before we go any further, any questions you have on like the origin story first, or like,
no, tell me the unfolding, right? Because then there's a question about land acquisition and leases. So just kind of dive me through the, start to finish. So you've got a very hot shed of chickens, which at a brooder stage, not so bad, but
yeah. So we first started by just getting animals, which usually you want to have everything set up beforehand. So I got on Facebook and said, does anybody have any ground that they want to lease? And this very kind lady said, yeah, I got some acres. And I thought, oh, cool, it's gonna be like 5 acres. Maybe we'll start with some sheep. Turned out to be a lot more than that. And so it kind of changed the whole thing that way. So we got the brooder, we're brooding chickens, and then we didn't have the Salatin tractors weren't built. We've always kind of been I don't know what the word is.
Well, ready, fire, aim.
Yeah, there it is.
Or
flying by the seat of our pants. The
we've got to go out.
We should build a tractor.
That's right. It's not unique to our operation. I feel like you say it more maybe as a farmer rancher, but we always just joke that our slogans will figure it out,
right.
And so we had talked about chickens, and maybe this is my truth and not the reality, but like I feel like James kind of ultimately just called us and he said, I ordered 150 chickens, and we're like, okay, I guess we'll figure that out. And so
I feel like so many of us start that way, right? So that's a great origin story.
Yeah, and he calls me, he's like, hey, I'm at the co-op and I just got 150 chicks. McKinley's gonna meet me down here. Like, we hadn't even thought about waters, heat lamps. And so like literally in the same day, these guys are trying to figure out how to like keep these little fluff balls alive. And so now we got the forcing function. We got like, okay, 3 weeks and we need to get Salatin tractors built. So luckily James and McKinley both had the Polyface Designs book. I call that book, it's built by Polyface Farms, but I call that book like the Legos for like a Lego book for farmers and ranchers, because it's so good step by step. And we built 2 chicken tractors, pretty high lumber prices, so things were a little more expensive. Joel's a little unique with some of his supply sourcing that we can't get out in the West, but we built these 2 tractors. We got them onto pasture, and we moved the birds out there pretty painlessly, honestly. We threw them in the back of the truck, put some shade cloth over them. They stayed pretty calm and chill, and we got them out. But then it got exciting pretty quick. McKinley, for context, maybe just to think about our partnership structure, it's kind of unique. Like, I would say predominantly most smaller farms and ranches are multi-generational family ranches and farms. You don't have as many newer established ranches and farms. And so McKinley lives up in the Camas Valley. So he's about a 7-minute drive from the ranch.
Super close.
I live in the Salt Lake Valley, and so that's actually a 38-minute commute for me. And James does as well. And so there's kind of a little bit of dependency on McKinley as the primary operator for us on a daily basis. I'm up here about 4 times a week, and James is up here less frequently just with his job, and he helps kind of some back office accounting and other things. But I guess my point in saying that is I'm sometimes away. I'm not the first one to the farm. And so when McKinley was the first one to the farm one day, he's like, yeah, we got a predator problem. And I didn't really like, whenever you hear that news secondhand, you're like, oh, that's horrible. Like sometimes you hear about pain and suffering across the world and you're like, oh, that's horrible. But if it's in your own backyard, it's different. I didn't really comprehend like what it looks like for there to be like, 8 murdered chickens from raccoons.
Right.
And like the stress that was creating.
Yeah, it was a little bit of more context about our location. So we're backed up to 2.2 million acres of national forest.
Just a little predator pressure, right?
Yeah, so we're in a river bottom too. So it's like that's the water source for a lot of creatures. So yeah. And so one thing we didn't realize is that if you don't have flat ground, the Salatin tractors aren't super functional. In fact, not many tractors are functional.
I'm so glad you bring that up. Unlevel ground is a surprising barrier to chickens. So
yes.
Your only level ground is tilled ground primarily.
Unfortunately. So we learned that and this, no criticism to the master Joel Salatin, but he recommended chicken wire, just the standard one inch chicken wire. Raccoons with their opposable thumbs can reach in there and grab chickens. So we had to retrofit it with more weight with welded wire or hardware cloth. And we also had to create these skirts to create so they couldn't get underneath where we didn't have level ground. So, and there was it's slight topography, but that just slightness caused, you can get anything in there, skunk, raccoon. And if the big fear for us, which down there is a lot of riparian area, is weasels. I grew up, my dad tried doing this in the early 90s and he had the same thing. He lost 100 chickens in a day because of weasels or stoats, what they're called around here. So, that's one thing we learned really, really quickly is that there's certain contexts where chickens work and you have to have the infrastructure to do it right. So that's kind of our beginnings of the chicken story. We took that and we'll kind of jump forward in time, I guess, to now. We decided to go 100x the amount of chickens, 10x. Not 100.
Not yet.
Not 100.
Lots of chickens, though, right?
Let's
be real.
So we're doing 1,000 chickens now, and we have chicken schooners, and we have a totally set up brooder that's the Joel Salatin on a mobile running gear or wagon, and that's actually been probably as stressful as just 150, but it's kind of a longer period of time. I don't know. What do you think about
Well, so I think we're talking primarily about chickens right now, not the cattle, but on the chicken front, I think you read these books like You Can Farm or whatever from Joel Salatin, and the worst part about reading that book is you're no longer like ignorant. You're kind of just like hearing his words in the back of your head as you're making the wrong decisions. Like, like as you're not having your water and fence infrastructure in place before you do something, or as you're not having a brooder built before you buy the chickens, like things like that. So the biggest kick in the pants, the brooders were a little rough to build from a timing perspective because it was just tight and we felt a little stressed. But the schooners were really rough. We bought them from Featherman Equipment, and bless their heart, like every other freaking industry out there with supply chain issues. Between that and shipping, we knew we had chickens ordered. They were going to be ready in 3 weeks. And then we knew that we had to have those schooners ready then. Well, those schooners came a week and a half late. So we're at 4.5 weeks. And then they didn't give us any directions on how to build 2,500 pounds of steel. And so we then had about another week and a half or 2 weeks. And so at this point, we're talking about 6-week-old birds that we didn't know what to do with. We took them out of the brooder at about 3.5 weeks because we're like, this is going to turn into a really anaerobic, ammonia-infilled brooder environment. Luckily, we had the leftover Salatin tractors. So you can actually throw about 125 small birds into the Salatin tractors each. And like, it was okay. But then at 6 weeks, there was that stress again of like, these birds are getting too big to be in Salatins. And luckily, we barely got one schooner done to throw them out. We kind of relieved. We still have another schooner to build. So like, anyway, we're probably going to way too much detail, but like,
I love this because I feel like what you're going through is what literally every farmer goes through, right? I'm motivated, I'm excited, and nothing comes in at the right time. And also like the level of, I didn't prepare. Is that my fault, or is this just part of the process? Like, so it feels like so at home of like,
good.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's comforting
or we got to have
we need to have a big intervention as producers.
I think if we would, we still all would do it that way though. Like if somebody was like, you really should be ahead of the schedule, and you're like, yeah, I totally am going to do that, and then you absolutely don't. So I don't think we're savable, which is why I really like that. It's full of errors and we deal with them anyway.
Yeah, we figure it out. So that the stress is, I think, on them. If we had the brooder ready at the beginning of the season, if we had the schooner ready at the beginning of the season, the stress would have been significantly less. The benefit of what we have in infrastructure this year by far that we did not have last year. And the reason we made the move we did, just to kind of like pull back from a business decision, like at the beginning of in March, we were talking like, how many birds do we do this year? We were trying to do planning for the year. And we said, well, we did 130. What if we did like 300? Like, well, if we did 300, we'd have to either go build a few more Salatin tractors, or we could go do the smaller like Siskovich tractors, but those are only like 30 birds each. So then we'd have to build like 5 or 10 of those. And it became this weird economies of scale game. We're like, do I really want to go fill feed and fill water on 10 different units and move those 10 individual units? That time management is tricky for us. The Salatins were too heavy. We had an intern, Maddie, who is potentially coming for the summer. We thought, you know what, she or any other dude or woman or man would have a hard time moving this thing on their own. And so we just looked at the math, and I built a janky Excel spreadsheet with some ideas of cost. And it's pretty fun when you change a number from 150 to 1,000. All of a sudden you start to see economies of scale, and you're like, well, we could actually make better profits if we just scale it up with supposedly same amount of work. Long story short, it's obviously more work, but the saving grace is that we have water. We have permanent water infrastructure. We have the cabin we're in now is where the schooners are actually right behind us. We have essentially tapped into a spigot out here, culinary water, that runs 800. We put it to a 3/4 inch poly pipe. It runs down the whole stretch of the 3.5 acre pasture. We have compression tees at every 100 feet with Plasson compression tees. And so as the schooner moves down the pasture, we just have water. We have hoses coming out of the schooners, and then just tap into the different sections of that water line. If we were doing that when we were doing that for 130 birds, when they were 8 weeks old, we were having to give them multiple 5-gallon buckets of water a day from the creek, walking it over. And now we don't worry about water at all. And like, so that stress would have put us over the edge, I think, for sure. If we didn't have water infrastructure figured out, for sure. Anyway, we're just rambling into our different areas.
No, I love this. So I feel like you hit on like 5 different really, really important topics that I would love to go into.
Yeah.
Like one is like understanding what labor means on those different styles of tractors, right? So, you go on Instagram and there's some like sweet 90-pound girl and she's pulling this tractor with like hundreds of chickens. And that reality is often sometimes limited due to how much wood weighs, is it on wheels, all this good stuff. So
steel or aluminum siding or whatever,
all this different stuff. So I think there's the understanding of like, you guys not being on the farm too every single time. That's a different economies of scale. A lot of people who live there can always be there to check waters or be present, and you guys have such an interesting dynamic that you're not always there. So I'd love to kind of go in. I would love to hit on the skirts that you put on the chicken tractors, how you circumvented your predator pressure and what you think is best for that, because that's a huge question for people. And then if you kind of want to go into like how you made those things work and how you made those decisions about people not being there all the time. Because I think that's so important that we all say, well, I have a full-time job, I couldn't possibly farm. Well, you guys are clearly like showing that you can make it possible. And I think that really opens doors for people.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can have a full-time job and farm. It's just what it depends on what animal, really. Right. That's really what it comes down to. So I guess we'll tackle your first question first about the skirts. So what I did, it was I don't, yeah. So
I showed up the next day, and then him and his parents, I think, just tackled this. I was like, whoa. Yeah, you were stressed. This is a lot of work. So I go,
no.
Well, that's what happens when you see the bodies all over the ground.
That's right.
Like something has to happen before the sun goes down the next day.
yeah, that's for sure. So what we did is I sandwiched just normal chicken wire between two pieces of
1 by 2.
It was 1 by. It was cut up. It was 1 by 2. So we cut up a 1 by 6 into a 1 by 2, and we turned it into a 1 by 1. And then we sandwiched about it's 1.5 feet or 2 feet of chicken wire, and we screwed that onto the bottom rail of the Salatin tractor. And the sides were permanent, but the front had to be the front and the back. We had you just lay it on to the bottom. So basically, the point was to create a barrier so an animal couldn't force itself underneath or fit its hand. So that chicken wire seemed to be adequate. We didn't have another predator issue. Again,
do you lift it like when you move it, or is it enough that when you pull it doesn't move? Tell me a little bit.
So the sides were, so what we did is we just put a little nail on the top of it, and we would lift the skirt up and just hang it on the nail, and then you would pull it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then we kind of, the topography got severe enough where we would actually have large pieces of slash or wood to weigh it down, because it would just be like this big hole that they could still get underneath. So we had like 8 pieces of wood, large pieces of wood we'd have to, so that added probably another 15 minutes to the chores, fascinatingly enough.
In fact, maybe in your links, your show notes, if you wanted to, we have a good YouTube video that shows without audio, but it's just kind of like you can see us pulling those off every day. To McKinley's point, it did add time.
And weight too.
Right. Like, so weight to pull, add additional, the time to lift and put back down every time. So like, I never want to dissuade people, but understanding that flat land is where chickens go, and not flat land makes a lot more time commitment. So I feel like this is the good stuff.
Yes. No, I mean, if you don't have flat land, I recommend you don't do chickens, period. To be honest, and where we're at now has been cultivated at some point, and so
it's pretty flat.
It's nice
and
flat.
There's just such thick forage. We're really fortunate with the way this field is right now. It is so thick with clover that and you have a 2,500 pound structure, that the combination of that weight, that you just have enough compacted forage that it can kind of act as some of that padding where you do have holes, and we still have to patch some stuff. We can talk about it later.
Yeah.
So does that kind of help visualize a little bit what we got going on with
it definitely does. I ask so much because we are in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and we want to do sheep in rotations, and you can imagine that has been nonsense. So I'm always like, okay, what little tricks did you do? And then what do you do when you're in a whole different environment? But that totally makes sense for, I would say, a 10-degree angle, right? You probably couldn't fight it too much more than that. What do you think?
Yeah.
One thing we haven't tried that we had debated on was running a larger, 1/4 mile or eighth mile of poly wire, poultry netting around the perimeter. And so you just have to move that every 5 days or something, which you see with a lot of chicken operations, later operations. They can be free in the day, but still kind of protected.
But then add the time commitment of picking up those netting sections and all that good stuff, add on time.
Yeah. So
and those are cumbersome.
Yeah.
We've used those before.
Yeah. So. And I assume you would have to let the chickens out in the morning, put them back in at night, because that poultry netting is insufficient for night pressure, I would assume.
Well, we wouldn't even let them out. We would just have that, instead of doing skirts, we would probably just have the netting around the units, the tractors, and that would do it. But
did that help or not enough for you guys?
We didn't end up doing
we didn't
that.
end up
You gave up on that one? Okay.
That was the thought.
But we have the Argyle Acres. They're about an hour away from us, and he raises turkeys and some chickens under some meat shaws and some open environments where he has narrow lanes of poultry netting, and that seemed to work for him. So I think it could have worked. I think that's another option.
Yeah, I think with that, I mean, we have pretty serious predator birds around here. We would be considering, if we're going to do open air, to have a dog, because otherwise you'll lose. You're just going to lose animals, which is part of it. That's some piece you have to make with the whole thing in general. But
and another piece of our context with a dog is like, we're in a rural community, but like we have residents around us on every side that have domestic dogs that I think would just get murdered by a Pyrenees or something else. And so,
and that's a whole fight with your neighbors that nobody wants to go down that road. So
yeah,
awesome.
Yeah,
not yet, not until we don't like their dog. I'm just kidding.
Fair
We would not do that.
Yes. I mean, we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
No, I think that's good. Another, like, keep happy with your neighbors, understand your context around you, and that dogs attract other dogs and all that good stuff. So
yeah. In fact, one day early this year, McKinley came out, and so when we had the birds in the Salatin tractors. I mean, you could tell this story better.
Yeah, so I just showed up and it was afternoon chores, just checking in on stuff, and a very large dog was inside of our Salatin tractor. It had jumped on top, and where one of the sides is open. And so, like, it's not open, but it's just got poultry netting on it, and it broke through it. But it didn't eat a chicken. It didn't kill anything. It was just in there.
It's like a doodle of some kind.
It was some kind of like a herding dog mixed with a doodle, and it just wanted to be with them. It was really something else. Because I saw something in there. I saw something in there, and I was ready to
bludgeon something.
Go to war, but fortunately it wasn't. I looked in there, it's like, there's no dead chickens. I should just let this dog out.
Some very confused dog.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Anyway, I'm trying to remember what your other questions were. Sorry.
Well, I was about to say, let's go on to other things that are on the farm. Obviously, the chickens are kind of the problematic animal due to predator pressure and, small batch and all that good stuff. So tell me about some of the other enterprises that possibly have been a little easier and more impactful on the land.
Yeah, I think it feels like the right pace is, if you should never take on more than one enterprise in a year, is my mind, like an additional enterprise. So we're in year 2. We have 2 enterprises. We had 2 enterprises last year. Maybe that was a cheat year because it was small amounts, but so we have 2 enterprises right now. We have the birds, and then we've got the cattle. And so our cattle, we had 3 head last year, and we've grown our herd through breeding and through purchasing. So we have a variety of different breeds of cattle. We have, so we've got the 3 pair from last year. 2 of those moms had calves this year. We lost one, and then we bought. We're kind of in this balance. We're like, do we want to be a genetics building ranch? Like, do we want to focus on phenotypes and other attributes of cattle that will help them be really good grazers and finishers on grass for us? Or are we going to be kind of Salatin style, which is we're just going to buy stockers every year and raise them for a year and sell them out, and that's what we're going to do, and this is the business decision. Right now, we're leaning more towards genetic, selection over time. So we bought 1 cow and one pair that's a Faro cattle company breed, Black Angus, that's known for being a better grass finisher. And then we bought 3. We bought 3 from Montana, up in Sheridan, Montana, 5L cattle company, and they have some Red Angus that are really nice, low profile, alleged grass finishers. So not even just the fact that they're grass finishers, but these cattle don't hay in the winter time. They have to forage. They have to just graze through the winter or whatever is in those cold Montanas. So
yeah, and they don't. We've been real impressed with them. They seem to not care about what you feed them. So
again, we're telling you, we're like proud grandparents that are just showing our list of like luckily we don't have like 200 cattle, because we probably tell you about like each one. Like, oh, they're so
here's this
cute. Number
baby, and
2, we
here's this
love 2.
baby.
She's the
No.
cutest. But anyway, the bottom line
No.
is we have 18 cattle right now. We are 16, excuse me, of our own. That's all cows and calves combined. And then we have 8 cows as well in our herd right now that we're doing custom grazing with. And I think this is we should have done this last year, candidly, but we didn't, because I think we didn't know. We didn't know the context of the land, how well the forage would grow, and how much we'd have for the winter and stockpile. But what we are doing is we are grazing a neighbor's cattle. So far, we've been doing it for just over 2 months. And the thinking there is our other slogan last year was, for sure, we need more cows, because we were not getting herd effect and not moving across the 40 acres that we had fast enough. And that creates problems in terms of like your recovery time and building a healthier soil system. And keeping those plants in an active growth phase. So the custom grazing is a really great way to, one, have a little bit of supplemental income. It's not a huge amount. We're kind of just charging conventional prices. In retrospect, I would encourage people, if they're doing regenerative daily moves on their cattle, charge a premium. Like, there's some serious care we're taking to these animals. We know immediately when they have red eye or, foot rot or whatever else. So that's been really good for us, because we have moved significantly faster through our pastures in a good way, because of both increased herd, but also this custom grazing.
I love it. Let's go deep into that, because that's the grit, right, of grazing is such a finesse. And so when you guys started out, you did the bomb bale grazing. Tell me a little bit about, like, from first getting that land to obviously now the expansion. Tell me about those growth cycles and kind of what was your immediate takebacks? How did you work through it? And what would you do better, of course?
Yeah. So when we first started, a big decision-making process we were dealing with was this drought. We received, what was it? Like 48% of normal. And the previous years we had received like 70% of normal of typical winter. So we were really nervous. That's the reason we started with that small amount of cattle.
Maybe just mention too, we flood irrigate on our land, and so we are dependent on those watersheds, the snowpack and the watersheds, for what's coming off the mountain. If the water isn't high enough in the river, we can't get enough flow to actually even flood irrigate.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. And so we're very, so the way the property works is we're bisected literally down the middle of the property by a creek, which is very fortunate, because that allows us to strip graze in a very controlled manner. And where if you don't have water infrastructure in grazing, you can't do holistic planned grazing or adaptive multi-paddock grazing efficiently. You just can't get your cows out to where they need to get to really utilize that forage and to get the right type of herd effect. So we're very lucky that way. And then so in Utah, hay prices are extraordinarily expensive compared to the Midwest and the East Coast. They say in the Midwest and the East Coast that they waste more hay than we can grow in a year. So that's always been a big concern, is how do we get away from hay prices? How do we totally get out of that world? And we're still trying to experiment with that. We were very fortunate, because we didn't have a lot of cattle, we could stockpile forage everywhere. And so we weren't really worried about that. We were able to graze until December 31st. And then we started feeding. And then the cool thing that was really unique, where we thought we were going to destroy, this is because I grew up here. I grew up on a cattle ranch, and they say you don't start grazing until May 15th or even past the first week in June. And so that means you're feeding cattle if you're doing conventional grazing for 6 months of the year.
That's crazy.
Which is not a profitable, even if hay prices are cheap, that's a long time to feed cows. So we decided to try to start grazing in April. And the reason we were able to do that is because we left forage behind. We were always we grazed it once during that year, and then it recovered, and we didn't touch it until we came back that April. And the good thing about that is the warning is that you'll bloat your cows, which is real and happens every year around Utah. It happens all the time
because of the new growth.
Yeah,
grass.
The new growth is extraordinarily high in nitrogen. People call it fog fever or bloat or whatever. You put an animal that's not accustomed to that, they will blow themselves out.
So tell me a little bit about what time of year you did that first graze. What was your recovery time? Just generally what points in the year were you looking for that?
So the place we leased had been overgrazed for
decades,
right?
Centuries, maybe century and a half.
Yeah.
So we decided to rest it an additional month longer. So we started grazing on June 26th of 2020, right? 2021.
Yeah.
So usually you start in May 15th. So that extra month of rest dramatically changed how the pasture reacted because it hadn't received that for a very, very long time. So so we didn't have enough cows. We really needed to move faster because we wasted a lot of feed, like legitimately waste, not just like, because the growth cycle normally stops in the end of July if you don't graze it or cut it, because it's just, the plant has fulfilled its purpose of going to seed. So the way we do it, we calculate, we're a take half, leave half operation. So we calculate our size of paddocks, what our need is, how much forage we have with we don't do it every day, just so you're clear, but we kind of can eyeball it after a certain point. But
is this confessions? I don't know.
I think it's okay that people don't move
this
animals every day.
Okay.
Like we're allowed.
Well, we move them every day. We just don't measure every day.
We don't measure every day.
Fair enough. I think a large margin of imperfection, I think, is allowed when you're trying new things, right?
Yeah. So we have about between 120 and 365 day rest period. Essentially, that's how that goes. We could do it shorter, but right now our philosophy, we're not trying to max out our production. And if you're looking to be a resilient producer, you can't ever max your production, period. Because if something goes wrong, like a drought hits, you will lose your shirt or your soil, you'll compromise the soil of your, I mean, the thing that's, my dad's been doing this for a long time up there. And during that drought, there was a little bit of negligence on a couple of places, and that 20 years of work goes out the window in 1 year. And so that's kind of the where we're coming from, is like, we know we're going to be in significant droughts in the future. Likely we'll be in a decade, will probably be 3 years of drought for every decade, maybe more.
And I think it's good. It's good for us. And I think, I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but it's important, not good. It's important to recognize the unique situation we're in as a ranch in that context, because it can become really easy when we have field days and people come on and they're like, whoa, look how much forage you still have. And why are these other ranchers like in like a freaking golf course right now? And it is that empathy for historical context and current context of someone's operation is so important, because you just don't know why they've had to make the decisions they've made. And it's likely because, I mean, there's so many variables. Like one interesting topic, I think, over time for regenerative ranchers who have leases is that, should you be paying for leased ground or should they be paying you? Because there's the more expensive your lease is, the more motivated you are to get your bang for your buck. And so you're going to overstock that land. And so it's just, so if, depending on what these leases are for these ranchers, they're probably doing bad practices because in the short term, they think they're going to get higher yield or weight or whatever else. And anyway, it's been a really big empathy building coming from a non-agricultural background and a, ivory tower kind of view of, why isn't everyone doing regenerative agriculture? It just, a lot of empathy and patience. I just, whenever anyone who's listening to this or anyone who looks at your Instagram feed and sees all these amazing things, the last thing you should do is go and yell at a farmer or rancher who isn't doing these things. That's just not helpful dialogue. Anyway, that's a tangent off of what you're talking about with cows, but it's been a serious learning curve.
That's a big thing for us, because a lot of people say, I can't do that, because they were yields were better in the past, fertilizer's too expensive to use now, and so people are starting to have to destock, and it's really hard. And hay prices are just in the West, almost cattle ranching is not profitable, period. If you're in the commodity market, and even if you're doing direct sales, it's pretty brutal. I mean, you're to feed a cow, a steer, or a heifer for 2 winters is $1,400 to $1,800 period. And so, especially if you're doing it for 6 months, probably much longer. It's more. It's probably $3,000 if you're doing that, if you're feeding it for 6 months of the year. So, anyway, so going back to it, if you leave forage on the ground, that's going to turn brown. That's going to be carbon, and all of the new growth that's really high in nitrite or nitrates can be balanced out. So the cow, as it's going in to get the green stuff because it wants it, it's also having to get a mouthful of brown, and so or high carbon. So that balances out their rumen. And then as their gut, it takes a cow about 10 to 14 days for its rumen to change over. You won't experience bloat, at least. And again, it depends on your type of forage. If you're feeding on an alfalfa field, you need to avoid that at all costs or something like that. So there's a lot of depends and a lot of things that way, but essentially you just have to make a chart of where you're going to go. Either it's best if you write it down. We haven't been writing it down, to be totally honest. But if you have an idea of like, okay, this is where this is going to be our, and you always want to cycle. I never want to start at the same place. You never want to do the same rotation. You always want to start something somewhere else. So you just kind of have to be like, okay, this is where our next year's April feed is going to come from. And one thing we're really toying with that I think we're going to do for sure next year is we're going to do warm season cover crops after our first graze through the spring flush, and then plant plants that have thick stems and stalks like corn, field corn,
Southern Sudan,
sorghum Sudan grass, sunflowers, sun hemp, and seed. Because the thing that's actually kind of interesting is that ranchers, at least in the past, like they'll force their cows to feed on thistle, and the reason they can feed on thistle in the winter is that it's thick enough to withstand the snow loads that we get. We'll get 3 feet of standing snow almost every year here. Sometimes a lot more than that. It's much more. It used to be much more common. It's less common now. So we're trying to figure out how to eliminate hay completely out of our operation, and it's going to take a lot of careful planning. We would prefer not to pay for seed for cover crop, but if we can say, hey, that's only going to cost $5,000 for 50 acres, say, and it's going to cost us $25,000 to feed our animals. It's a no-brainer, and it's healthier for your soil. It's increasing your biodiversity. It's increasing the palatability of what the cows can eat. And so that changes their health. They may finish better. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're at with the cows at the moment. But to be honest, if you want to farm or ranch part-time, cattle are really a good way to go, in my opinion. If you have access to land and you can have good water infrastructure, it's a 35 to, it depends on how much time. I mean, we find ourselves wanting to spend more time than just what it takes to move them. And so
it's less than an hour a day.
It's less than an hour.
Sure.
If you're in a hurry, you don't have to be there more than 45 minutes. Occasionally you'll find cows out, you got to get them back in, and that's, whatever, but you can easily have a job and do a lot of cattle. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Gordon Hazard. He was a veterinarian in Mississippi, and he had 1,800 head, and he was a full-time veterinarian. And he'd go do that. He didn't move them every day, and you don't have to move them every day. You could do every 3 days. If you have enough land, you can really get creative about that stuff. So
yeah. Well, that's why I think it's so important to allow that movements every day are great. Well, movements 3 times a day are even better, but not moving them at all because we can't do this, because we can't fit it in our lifestyle, is the worst case scenario, right? So being accepting of different ways around it. So give me kind of some high level, obviously you're probably surrounded by conventional at some point. Tell me a little bit about just kind of some of the benefits that you've seen for your work versus the other, particularly with the varying season, the unique climate. What is going right about the experiment?
So with the cattle operation, the recovery on the land is humbling and beautiful. It's amazing. we haven't been perfect documenters of like last season, this season necessarily, but there are areas that were bare. I think about like when we go over our culvert into the southern pasture, and it's like that used to be pretty much bare. And now this year it's a mix of grasses and dandelions. So you can see the succession of plants like moving up the succession. And so it's getting better. Or we walk through an area of meadow brome that's, you know, up to our chest, and we're both over 6 feet tall. And so to have those kind of moments where you're just seeing pure coverage and then density, because we were here a year ago, like we're walking the same fields and we know what it felt like last year, and we can tell the difference of what it feels like this year. And that is a really amazing like feeling to just know that that's happening. I always wish we were quantifying it even better. I would encourage anyone who's wanting to get in that is like over document. You can't over film or over photograph what you're doing.
Well, and that's in such a short time too. That's 1 year, and we say regeneration takes, you know, a long time. So that's already just 1 year's impact of that.
And that's on the forage side. Ecologically, we're seeing
it's
more birds.
Yeah, I honestly, I mean, unless you're in a very, very brittle environment, and we're in a fairly brittle environment, but we're in a riparian area, regeneration it can happen much quicker than I think. It depends again on your context. How much labor can you put into it? How many times can you move your cows a day, and all that type of situation. But the ecological, I mean, we had some birds last year. I mean, it's a very diverse area. We're very fortunate to be in the place we're at. But there were this year. There's flocks of like hundreds of birds that just live with the cattle. There's probably double the amount of sandhill cranes. We have fairly large mule deer bucks living on the property. I just saw 2 fawns the other day that were born on the property. I mean, it's dramatic, and the amount of forage is probably quadrupled, tripled easily
compared to what they usually have this time of year.
Yeah, this time of year, it's you're done. I mean, you're lucky to stick 20 cows out there, and if you just put them out there, I mean, it's
I'd say those are probably the 2 key things. Just the ecological recovery is huge. I'd say the other thing though is that on the poultry side, so we haven't processed any of our beef, just to be really clear. You know, we're still in this growing our herd. We anticipate 24 to 28 months or so for finishing our cattle. 24 to 28 months old. And so with our chicken though, you know, last year 130 birds, that sells pretty quick to friends and family. When you get to 1,000-ish plus birds, you're kind of like, how do we sell this stuff? The response from the community up here, and the way they come to the farmers market every week, and you start having a repeat customer that says, give me a chicken, like they're some kind of addict. You're like, this is amazing. You know, like they taste the difference. They know our values, the support we feel in the community from, we have a group here called like Recycle Utah or Summit Land Conservancy or Park City Community Foundation. These groups, they are throwing us at radio conversations or into newspaper interviews, or they want our story to be told, and to feel that camaraderie and community is just like, that social context is just as important as the ecological for us.
Yeah. Well, I love that you deviate into this, because what I think was really like interesting and unique about you guys is obviously there's some generational farming. There's some people that came from outside, but you're 3 friends farming together on leased land. Like, tell me about that dynamic and how it kind of benefits, because it's usually like one farmer, one couple that is just stressed out and ripping their hair out trying to do everything. Tell me a little bit about your dynamic and how you guys are making it work.
Yeah,
that's a good, lots of couples therapies, triples therapies.
That's right. Triples. But I mean, it works really well for us. You know, whenever somebody needs relief, usually there's somebody to take the relief. We can go on vacation, which is pretty unusual.
That's not a farming thing.
Yeah. And I mean, there's certain days where it's like, hey, you got to be here. We both have to be here, or this isn't going to work. Yeah. And that's normally processing days. That's working cattle.
Building
schooners. Yeah. It's mostly infrastructure, and then harvesting is really like the biggest part of it. And to me, when you work cattle, that's kind of a form of harvesting because they've kind of gotten to the point where you either got to castrate or
a working day
or work. Yeah, it's but that for us, that's only once a year, where for others, that's many times. But like for me, I mean, I live up here, so Mitch takes as much on as I do, though. So Mitch is really a master marketer and like overall high level strategy kind of a guy. And so I kind of defer to him on a lot of that. And so that's the thing, is we are each allowed to be self-expressed and like show and gain honest achievement for ourselves in whatever we're good at. We have the time to do it. We're not just like totally swamped with, I got to move chickens or I got to go move cows or whatever it is. And that's the only thing you can focus on is the labor side. And then, you know, if like for us, we don't like, neither one of us likes doing the books on anything. So James
gets to do that.
James gets to do that. He's an accountant anyway. So, and when Mitch or I can't show up, he'll fill in. There's certain times where that's happened. So, I mean, I left January for a month, and you can't do that as a rancher. And you know,
you could in a conventional, you know, but
you could. That's true.
Well, we're in regenerative where everything is better.
That's right.
Like,
you can't. No, you can't.
You can't do that. Like, I mean, and, you know, and that may have to shift as time goes on, as we get more enterprises. And, you know, we don't have employees yet. We're planning on getting employees in the future for sure, because that's the only way you can be regenerative at scale.
Yeah.
And then you're actually building community and all that kind of stuff. But for me, we couldn't be doing this without each other. We're totally interdependent on each other to make this work. And that's a funny thing. It's kind of interesting if you mirror that to ecology or just the environment in general. Everything is interdependent. And if there wasn't if it was just me doing this, it's not, and I were to die, it's not regenerative.
That's the end, right?
That's it. And the end of it. And that the hope is to, whether through the employees we hire or whatever, or our children, that they come and take it from us, because that's the only way it's going to work. Because what we're trying to do is, you know, hopefully 500 years from now, the same operation is running in maybe a larger scale, or there's more diversity to it. So that's kind of the whole thing that we're trying to create. And without each other, we couldn't do it. That's the honest truth.
One thing we've talked about, we actually heard at a farmer's market last week, and this agricultural economist, he's like 60 years old, but one of the first questions he asked us, he says, "Do you pay yourself?" And we said, "Yeah, no,
not right now."
Really. And so it's a really good push, because I can't remember who said this. Someone probably did, but if not, I did. Is that, you know, it's not actually a business unless you can pay for at least 2 employees.
Yeah. And
so we're trying to get to that state right now. We're not there yet, but we've talked a lot about, you know, McKinley is up here the most as far as like boots on the ground operations of the ranch. I'm probably spending equal amount of time, but on the website stuff and back
and here as well.
And so, and I, you know, cumulatively I have about an hour and a half of driving every day, 40 minutes each way. So, so the point is when you create a partnership, whether it's 2 people, 3 people, whatever it is, you have to kind of define what equality looks like or equity looks like in that ownership structure. And I would say that like last year it felt more like a hobby, and this year it's definitely stressed to the limits of like, this is a business. There is greater financial risk here and there's opportunity, but we have to invest our time to make that financial opportunity happen. And it's I think it's important. You need to have open dialogue between each other to like say what is working, what isn't working. You can call this like companion inventory or like partnership inventory or like you know, 360 feedback kind of peer reviews, but you need to be able to have that kind of open space, because you know, I think we're trying to figure that out this year. Like this is a stressful year, and how we each showed up, we had different amounts of time in different ways. Did that feel fair? That's a big question we're trying to figure out. So
yeah, ag's an interesting business, because infrastructure is expensive, but it's all, if you're going to do it this way, it's all labor.
Yeah.
And that is not what the American economy has been based off of for a long time, at least at least from what I'm aware of like, no, your body actually matters more than the money that you can give to the operation.
Right.
Which is kind of, I mean, it's a throwback for sure, back to a different time period, but it's and then, you know, half our time is probably spent trying to figure out how to do sales too. I mean, I mean, we're trying to build out our sales funnels, and that's educating people on what we're even doing.
Well, that's why I think it's so interesting that, like, you know, so somebody's supposed to be the farmer to learn how to be the best regenerative farmer, grow out the best and do everything. Well, that can be a full-time job plus tenfold. And then I need to go out and market directly to people so I don't lose my margin. I think your system of having multiple people who can dedicate their enthusiasm to places, not, I don't want to do the books, but the books need to be done or I'm not going to know my margins. It helps to have somebody who is very passionate in each of those zones without like forcing you to do a topic that you just hate compounded on top of a very long days of work. So I love this split.
Yeah. It's really interesting, you know, like we're very aware of each other's schedules, and, you know, with McKinley and real estate, there's just days where maybe he's got to go do like 4 showings from 10 to 4 or something. I'm like, hey dude, I'll take care of the cattle and I'll do the move, usually in like the early afternoon. But sometimes McKinley be like, no dude, like I need to move the cattle because like that's the best part of your day. You know, like, and it's really rewarding that way when it's stressful and it's time consuming, but the end of the day, if you can just sit on a bar of the schooner and just watch these dumb birds catch a grasshopper and chase each other, there's something just simple and great about that.
Yeah, there's something magical about it for sure. It's weird. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it just reminds you what it's all about, really. Doing just animals expressing themselves, like one of the purest forms of expression I think there is.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I love that you guys have found a way to strategize and have a system, integrate it in not a real way of living, but a non 100% farming lifestyle. This can work with your jobs, and it's not a second burden. It's a second enjoyment. Like, because sometimes when we're like, oh, I take on a second job and I'm bartending through the night because I need more money and I'm killing myself. Well, wouldn't it be also pretty enjoyable to be farming and be out improving the land and enjoying animals? So I think you guys have created a very like unique system that really offers a lot of potential to people that maybe feel isolated. Like, I want to farm, but I don't have the resources. Well, maybe they just haven't met their friends yet that are about to be
that's right.
The next 3 springs, you know, farm that's going after it.
You know, one thing we're trying to figure out though is that, you know, part of our kind of the way we think about our mission, we honestly need a better, more clear mission, but at some point it's like, how can we create thriving agricultural communities through our practices that are both economically and ecologically sustainable? And so we hope that you can make an honest wage in life out of ranching. And so we want to be as open with our books as possible now and in 5 years from now, that we can say, look, in 5 years of starting this ranch, we have been able to employ, you know, have a $400,000 of profitability to support X number of people or whatever it is. We believe that's possible. We think it's vital. So McKinley made a comment at the beginning about where we live. So where we ranch, Camas Valley is 20 minutes away from Park City. And especially with COVID, everyone said the billionaires pushed out the millionaires, like by far. And so, so now all those millionaires, just quote unquote, that idea of that wealth has poured into this valley, which is not a bad thing. I actually love the way the community dynamic works. I think it's healthy right now. Where it could become unhealthy is that you have the largest transfer of wealth in the next 10 years, primarily through real estate. And if trusts and families are inheriting ranches and farms that are in the red, there's an easy decision they have to make, which is, do we keep this operation or do we sell it? And there are plenty of developers knocking on the door and in the ears of our legislators that are happy to make development happen. I'm not anti-development, but I am anti-non-holistic development, I'll say. If they are not looking at the whole when they are thinking about building out a community, then we're not in a place to do that kind of crap anymore. Like that stuff needs to stop, because Utah used to focus so much on, we need to bring all this business to our economy. And like, we are a fine economy. We're diversified. Stop telling people to come here. You're welcome if you want. But we're not desperate for people. Like, we're fine. Stop thinking that, because now we're going to just go build more freaking neighborhoods and desertify the Camas Valley that is part of our small water cycle that builds the snowpack for all of our ski resorts.
And you've seen that happen in so many other places in the country. Like, let's not go there.
Yeah, I know this is going to a dark place. Let's pull back out to the light.
We know how that story goes. We don't want that.
But the light of it is that, we are doing a 3-year study through our extension university, Utah State, and we have funding from Park City Community Foundation, and we're doing ecological monitoring on our land as well as 2 other ranches to be able to say, what is our carbon sequestration? What is our other ecological impacts happening? And carbon credits are a really touchy area, carbon offsetting and all that stuff. But if you can scientifically, through what we're doing, show carbon sequestration, that's a nice incentive. That's a nice carrot for how to influence ranchers to change. And so we're trying to figure out, as the new kids on the block, how to influence other ranchers in the community to want to take on these practices and not make them feel forced or shamed into doing it. But we're trying to be a demonstration ranch, and we open our farm, we open our books, we'll do whatever we can to help that movement.
I love that. On that note, do you have any last advice for people who are either beginning, starting, excited about this space?
Just have patience and really just keep going. I mean, it's for me, if we need more people, we need more people. I mean, that's the labor and the awareness and the education, or the passion for it to get the education to know how to do this, is lacking. And if we don't do it, I mean, our food, everybody, I mean, the audience in the regenerative food world knows that the world's food system is pretty bad. And so just keep going. Have resilience, because it can be hard. It's not for the faint of heart. And if if you have land and you care about this, but you can't be a farmer, find someone to manage it and help them do it, because it's so hard to get land. So if anybody hears that, be with people who care about the land, respect them, and help them. Don't jump down their throats about how they need to be paying you a high rent or anything like that, because you're hardly receiving any money for ag leases are nothing anyway. So help people who care about the land.
If you're just getting started, I would say it's okay to be the new kid on the block, and it is a very welcoming community. You will have critics, but step into the arena and just start. You will find, my sister told me this my whole life, but those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind or don't care, whatever. We have made cold calls and cold DMs to random ranchers and farmers that we thought there's no way they're going to talk to us, so they're too busy. And they're like, come on over. And they spend 3 hours with us. And that community and willingness to open your arms and your mind and your time to someone new, we can't thank enough. Argyle Acres, Bill White Ranches, I think and Craig McKnight, there's these people that just have helped us out so much. Lloyd Marchant, these guys and women have been so influential to us. Just believe that you can create a community out there, and that there's a community already out there that'll help you and support you, and just step into the arena. We have already seen, I think, 2 or 3 different people come onto our farms or our ranch that weren't farmers yet. And since then they've started. And that is the most like amazing thing, and we want them to be as successful as possible. If you have an abundance mindset and realize how important we are in a stable civilization, you'll want to be here. That was a long last word, but that's where
Good
we're at.
last word.
But I love it. The most important one, that it's not competition, it's camaraderie, and that, you know, this is not a space for criticism, this is a space to, you know, create abundance. So I love it.
The demand is endless.
Yes.
Yeah, it's for this kind of product, it really is.
I love it, guys. Well, thank you so much. We will drop links to your website, your Instagram. You guys are constantly sharing good stuff. So everybody go follow them. You will not be disappointed. I appreciate it so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.